Margaret jolted awake long before dawn, her thin blanket tangled around her small shoulders. No alarm clock rang in the darkness. No gentle knock at her door. Her eyes simply snapped open as if hardship itself was whispering her name from beyond the cracked window. The world outside was still wrapped in the quiet of pre-dawn, the kind of quiet that didn't bring peace, but carried a warning: get up before trouble finds you. Shivering in her tattered cotton nightdress, Margaret reached for the worn-out broom propped against the wall. Half its bristles were gone, just like half her childhood dreams. At 10 years old, she knew her day had begun long before any rooster crowed. She swept the dirt yard, slowly moving the dust into soft little clouds that rose and disappeared like old forgotten prayers, her bare feet pressed against the cold ground, steady despite the sting. Before the first streak of sunrise glowed in the east, Margaret had already fetched buckets of water from the distant well, her thin arms trembling under the weight and stacked logs for the morning fire. Inside, waiting for her, was Lorraine, her stepmother standing guard over the boiling pot like an angry warden. The air smelled of burnt stew and bitter contempt. "Who cooked this mess?" Lorraine spat out the words as she glared over her shoulder. Margaret clasped her hands tightly and whispered, "I did, ma'am." And just like that, the dawn that should have welcomed her instead swallowed her whole. Margaret stood frozen at the kitchen doorway, her small fingers trembling against the worn hem of her dress. Lorraine's sharp eyes narrowed with disgust as she sniffed the bubbling stew pot again, wrinkling her nose like shed-inhaled poison. "This tastes like you boiled a wounded rat and called it dinner," she snapped, her voice echoing through the silent kitchen. Without warning, she grabbed the pot with both hands and flung it out the window. The metal clanged against the stone wall outside before landing upside down on the dirt, splattering dark red stew across the ground like spilled blood. Margaret didn't flinch. Her empty stomach growled in protest, but she only pressed her lips tighter together, holding back tears. Lorraine's voice sliced through the thick silence. "Go kneel outside under the sun," she ordered, her words dripping with scorn. "If I hear a single sound from you, I'll peel the skin off your back like old paint." As Margaret turned to obey her stepsister, Emily sauntered into the kitchen, her crisp school uniform pressed to perfection. Chewing gum with exaggerated smacks, Emily looked Margaret up and down and let out a cold, mirthless laugh. "You're still here? I thought death would have claimed you by now," she said, tilting her head mockingly. Without breaking her rhythm, she flicked her school sandal off her foot, letting it smack hard against Margaret's bony chest. Margaret bent down silently to pick it up, ignoring the way Emily twirled around and walked off humming a cheerful pop song, as if the morning's cruelty was nothing but a fun little game. Later that evening, after the sun had scorched her skin raw, Margaret returned to her tiny room-a-corner storage closet with a thin mat on cracked cement. She sank to the floor, her knees aching, and reached under her flattened pillow to pull out her most cherished treasure, a faded photograph. In it, a woman smiled softly at the camera, with eyes that glowed with gentle kindness, her arm draped around a little girl with short curls and bright dimples. Margaret traced the woman's face with her thumb, feeling tears prickle the back of her eyes. "Mama," she whispered into the quiet, the word trembling with longing. "Why didn't you take me with you?" The question floated in the darkness unanswered. The next morning, Margaret's legs felt weak as she carried the heavy water jug back from the well. The sun wasn't yet up, but already her thin arms burned with exhaustion. She stumbled on a rock, hidden in the dark dirt path, her knees buckling as the jug nearly toppled over her head. She somehow managed to regain her balance and limp home, fighting dizziness with each unsteady step. As soon as she stepped into the yard, Lorraine's shrill voice cut through the early gloom. "You devil's baggage! Why are you walking like you're carrying a coffin on your back?" Margaret's mouth parted slightly, her voice tiny as she gasped. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Lorraine scoffed, flipping her scarf over her shoulder with theatrical disgust. "Don't sorry me," she spat. "I'm tired of pretending you're my husband's child. In fact, you're not. They found you lying in the forest like an abandoned goat, and your so-called mother brought you home, claiming God gave her a child." Margaret felt her knees give way as the words cut through her chest like shards of glass. "We told her to leave you there, but she insisted. Now she's dead and you're still here, witch girl." The ground felt distant as Margaret collapsed to her knees, her vision swimming. "Not my child. Not Mama's child found in the forest," her mind repeated in shattered fragments. She didn't feel the tears sliding down her cheeks as her whole world crumbled around her in cold, unfeeling silence. That night, Margaret lay curled on her thin mat, her arms wrapped tightly around her small frame, as though holding herself together was the only way to keep from falling apart. Sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, Lorraine words echoed like cruel chants in her ears. "You're not my child. You're not even hers. They found you in the forest like a stray goat." The pain felt too deep to cry out. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, her fingers tracing the edges of her faded photograph again and again, hoping the memory of her mother's smile would shield her from the darkness. When dawn broke, Margaret forced herself to stand, her legs trembling beneath her weight. She gathered her ragged skirt and stepped out to begin her chores, feeling like her body was moving, but her soul remained behind on the mat. After sweeping, she trudged to the market, balancing a torn black plastic bag in her aching arms. It was filled with cheap vegetable sacre peppers and dried crayfish wrapped in old newspaper. She walked the dusty road with her eyes cast down, ignoring the laughter of vendors gossiping in the morning heat. The sun was already high when she returned home, sweat trickling down her neck. Her small shoulders burned pink under her torn blouse. As she stepped into the yard, her eyes widened with confusion and dread. Parked confidently in front of their run-down wooden house was a sleek black SUV, its tinted windows glinting under the sun like dark mirrors. Standing beside it was a tall woman with expensive sunglasses and polished leather heels that clicked sharply against the concrete, each sound screaming power and impatience. Next to her was a stern-faced man checking his watch repeatedly, as if each passing second offended him. Margaret tried to slip quietly into the kitchen, praying not to be noticed. But her father Charles called out in a voice so cold it froze her steps mid-stride. "Margaret, come here." She turned slowly, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. "Sir," she whispered. Charles didn't look her in the eyes as he spoke. "Go pack your things. You're leaving with them today." Her vision blurred instantly. "Sir, I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling like a broken violin string. Charles sighed with annoyance, waving a dismissive hand. "You're going to the city to work for them. They've paid. Don't come back here." The words hit her like a physical slap. She fell to her knees, clutching her chest. "Please, Daddy, please don't send me away. I promise he'll do better. He'll be good. Please." But Charles turned away, his face hard and empty, as if she wasn't a pleading child, but merely morning dust irritating his eyes. From the doorway, Lorraine smirked with cruel satisfaction, arms folded triumphantly. "Hurry up and pack before I do it for you," she sneered. Behind them, Emily leaned against the doorframe in her crisp blue school uniform, chewing gum lazily. She lifted her hand and waved mockingly, her grin stretching wide. "Bye, witch girl. Don't come back trash can." Margaret's chest ached so hard she thought it might split open. With slow, numb steps, she walked to her small room and pulled out her only belongings, 2 worn skirts, a thin blouse, and her mother's photograph. She folded them neatly into a cheap cloth bag, her fingers trembling. Before she left, she paused to look around the bare room one last time. No tears came, only emptiness. Then she walked outside, her shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. The woman snapped her fingers impatiently. The man pulled open the SUV door. Margaret climbed in silently, the door slamming shut behind her, like a prison gate closing forever on the life she once knew. Margaret sat stiffly at the far end of the SUV's back seat, clutching her small cloth bag to her chest, as though it were the only anchor keeping her from floating away into nothingness. The leather seat felt too soft beneath her thin frame, the air conditioning too cold against her sunburned skin. Her bare feet dangled above the floor mat, unsure where to rest. She felt like an object, rather than a person, packed away neatly for delivery. The wealthy woman in the front seat, now known as Mrs. Hawkins, scrolled her phone with long manicured nails, clicking softly on the screen, her gold bracelets jingling with every flick of her wrist. Beside her, Mr. Hawkins kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched in silent impatience. Neither spared Margaret a single glance. The only sound in the car was the quiet hum of tires against asphalt, broken occasionally by Mrs. Hawkins' sighs of annoyance when her phone notifications piled up. Margaret's wide eyes stared out the tinted window, taking in a world she'd only seen on faded calendar photos pinned to her mother's old wooden wall. Towering glass buildings rose like mountains to the heavens, their reflections dancing with the sun. Traffic lights blinked red, yellow, green in smooth rhythm like Christmas tree lights. Shiny cars flowed like rivers down wide roads without potholes. Men in dark suits hurried along sidewalks, clutching briefcases and talking into tiny earphones. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, the city's beauty both mesmerizing and terrifying. So this is the city, she thought, her chest tight. She had once dreamed of coming here, imagining herself as a student in crisp uniforms, laughing with friends under blooming trees. But now here she was, not as a student, not as a visitor, not as anything with dignity. She was merely property purchased for labor. After nearly 3 hours, the SUV turned into a quiet, gated community, lined with manicured lawns, flower beds pruned into heart shapes, and elegant houses that looked like they belonged in glossy magazines. Margaret's heart pounded harder with every turn. The car finally rolled to a stop in front of a mansion so massive it made her entire village look like a cluster of ant hills. The driveway was paved with clean white stones that sparkled in the sun. Glass windows gleamed without a single speck of dust. Palm trees lined the garden, their leaves rustling softly under the breeze from hidden electric fans. "Get out," Mrs. Hawkins ordered curtly without turning her head. Margaret scrambled to obey, her thin slippers slapping against the cool marble porch. The man opened the heavy front door, revealing a living room that took her breath away. The chandeliers hanging from the ceiling glowed like golden stars, their light scattering across the polished floors. Plush white sofas lined the walls, untouched and perfect, and a faint scent of lavender and wealth filled the chilled air. Margaret felt small, dusty, and invisible against all this silent grandeur. Mrs. Hawkins finally turned her sunglasses sliding down the bridge of her nose to reveal sharp brown eyes. "From today, this is your home," she said coldly. "You will take care of my husband's mother. She is old and sick. You will bathe her, feed her, clean her, and give her her medicine. No complaints, no noise. And if anything goes missing, I will lock you in the storeroom with the rats until you rot. Am I clear?" Margaret's lips trembled as she nodded. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered, her voice breaking. Good Mrs. Hawkins snapped her fingers. A tall, silent maid in a loose gray uniform appeared, gesturing with her chin. "Follow me." Margaret's heart pounded as she trailed behind the woman down a long, narrow hallway, past a shining kitchen, and down a dim corridor at the back of the mansion. The maid opened a door without looking back. "This is your room." Margaret stepped inside. The space was small, with a thin metal bed pushed against the peeling wall, a cracked mirror nailed above a short wooden table, and a single dusty window covered with iron bars. But to Margaret, it felt like a palace. She closed her eyes and whispered softly to her mother's memory. "Thank you. At least tonight, I will sleep in a bed." Before the rooster crowed in any village, Margaret was already awake in her narrow room, listening to the faint hum of distant air conditioners outside her barred window. Her body moved on instinct, driven by years of pre-dawn labor. She splashed her face with cold water from a chipped plastic basin, wrapped her thin scarf tightly around her hair, and stepped into the hallway, her bare feet silent against the polished tiles. She paused in front of a door at the end of the corridor. This was the room she had been warned about, the sick grandmother's room. Taking a trembling breath, she knocked softly. No answer. Pushing the door open, a wave of damp, heavy air hit her nose, a thick mix of stale perfume, medicine, and sadness. Curtains were drawn tight, choking the room in shadow. Margaret's eyes adjusted slowly, revealing an enormous bed where a frail old woman lay motionless under heavy blankets. Her skin was ashen and thin, her hair flattened against the pillow, her breathing shallow and tired. Bottles of untouched medicine cluttered a nearby table. A tangle of tissues and stained napkins lay scattered across the floor. Margaret felt fear twist inside her chest, but then, like a flicker of light piercing her dread, she remembered her mother's words from long ago. "Always greet the elders with kindness, no matter how dark the room." She stepped forward gently, drawing the curtains open. Golden morning light flooded in, illuminating the dull wallpaper and reflecting off the steel bed rails. The old woman stirred her eyelids, fluttering at the sudden brightness. Margaret knelt beside the bed, her thin fingers brushing the woman's cold hand. "Good morning, ma'am," she whispered, forcing her voice to stay calm and sweet. "My name is Margaret. Don't worry, I will take care of you." The woman's gaze shifted weakly toward her eyes, cloudy with unspoken pain. Margaret's heart clenched. She dipped a cloth in a small basin, wrung it out, and began to wipe the woman's face with tender strokes, humming under her breath. The song was an old lullaby from her mother's village about hope returning at dawn. As she cleaned, she spoke softly. "Today, we will make this room smell fresh again. I will braid your hair later too, ma'am. You'll look so beautiful." She moved with care, folding used tissues into a plastic bag, wiping down the dusty dresser, and sweeping the room in quick light motions. Her stomach growled from the skipped dinner the night before, but she ignored it. When she turned back, she saw the old woman's eyes were open now, wider, and glistening with the faint sheen of life. A tear slipped down the woman's wrinkled cheek. Margaret smiled and brushed it away gently. "Don't cry, ma'am. The sun is up. You're still here, and so am I." Little did Margaret know that the woman before her was once Gloria Peterson, founder of a vast manufacturing empire, feared and respected by boardrooms across the state. Once her signature sealed million-dollar deals. Her words silenced even the most arrogant executives. She had built her life from dust to diamonds, raising 2 sons, David responsible and beloved heir to her empire, and Thomas reckless and selfish the shadow child. But Gloria's world collapsed years ago when David, his wife Lily, and their young daughter vanished in a tragic car crash. Bodies burned beyond recognition. Only the child was never found, leaving Gloria to die slowly, in heartbreak, her power stolen by Thomas and his scheming wife, Vanessa. But that morning, when Margaret's voice called her beautiful something deep within Gloria, whispered for the first time in years, "She is here. My light is here. Live, Gloria. Live long enough to see the truth revealed." In the days that followed, Margaret woke earlier than the whisper of dawn itself. She would tiptoe down the hallway carrying her chipped plastic basin, a fresh towel folded neatly over her thin arm, and a bar of soap wrapped carefully in paper. Each morning she entered Gloria Peterson's room, the old woman's eyes flickering open at the sound of Margaret's quiet greeting. "Good morning, ma'am," she would whisper with a soft smile, drawing the curtains wide to welcome the rising sun. Then she would begin their small ritual, wiping Gloria's lined face with warm water, brushing her thinning hair gently, massaging lotion into her dry arms and legs, and humming old village lullabies that spoke of mango trees and cool rivers and prayers that never returned empty. Every day, Gloria blinked with a little more focus, her lips twitching as if words were gathering behind them. Margaret began telling her stories while she worked. She told her about her mother's laughter, about chasing grasshoppers barefoot in dusty fields, about how her stepmother called her a witch, and about the one time she climbed the tallest guava tree in her village, just to prove she could. Gloria listened in silence, but her eyes sparkled with life Margaret hadn't seen when she first entered that shadowed room. Then one morning, as Margaret adjusted Gloria's pillows, she paused and studied the old woman's sunken cheeks and proud nose. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling with childlike curiosity. "I bet you were so pretty when you were young." Gloria's eyelids fluttered, and for the first time in years, a tiny rasping sound escaped her throat. Margaret gasped, realizing it was a laugh, a weak, crackling chuckle, but a laugh nonetheless. Did you just laugh, ma'am?" Margaret's eyes widened with wonder. Gloria's dry lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Her voice emerged like a rusted hinge finding its strength. "Pretty," she croaked. "Girl, I wasn't just pretty, I was fire." Margaret's jaw dropped. "Fire," she echoed with awe. Gloria blinked slowly, her eyes sharp with memory. "When I walked by, men forgot their addresses," she whispered, her voice gaining volume with each word. "Your grandfather crashed his car the day he saw me in heels." Margaret burst out laughing, clutching her stomach. "Ma'am, teach me to be fire too," she squealed. Gloria closed her eyes with a tiny smile. "Fire comes with a strong mind, child. You can't be beautiful and foolish." That afternoon, Margaret sat by her bedside, reading from an old newspaper, stumbling over big words. "Mom, what's eco-economy?" Gloria rolled her eyes and flicked Margaret's forehead gently. "Economy." She corrected, her voice firmer now. "Say it again." Margaret grinned. "Economy." Gloria nodded. "Good. Now inflation." "Inflation." Margaret tried. Gloria groaned dramatically, rolling her eyes to the ceiling. "God help this girl. We have work to do." That evening, for the first time since her stroke, Gloria asked Margaret to bring her the landline phone hidden in the living room. With trembling fingers, Margaret slipped away, retrieved the heavy cordless phone, and placed it carefully in Gloria's frail hands. Gloria dialed a number from memory, her eyes blazing with newfound determination. "Sam," she whispered, when a deep voice answered. "It's Gloria. Call Dr. Harris. Bring the kit. We need to run a DNA test now." Margaret sat on the floor beside her, staring up with wide, fearful eyes. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but something inside her knew that the tides of her life were about to shift forever. In that silent room, filled only with the soft hum of the evening breeze, Gloria squeezed Margaret's hand gently and whispered, "Don't be afraid, child. The truth is coming home." 3 days later, Margaret woke before dawn as usual, her heart hammering with an unease she couldn't name. She bathed quickly and tiptoed down the silent hallway to Gloria's room, her chipped basin in hand, her small chest tight with anticipation. As she entered, Gloria's eyes were already open sharp and alive, staring at the ceiling like a queen contemplating war. Margaret smiled softly. "Good morning, ma'am," she whispered, placing her basin down and reaching for a clean towel. But Gloria didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed and fierce. Margaret paused, worry prickling her spine. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Before Gloria could answer, the landline phone on her nightstand rang sharply, its shrill tone slicing through the quiet dawn. Gloria reached for it with trembling fingers, pressing it against her ear. The silence in the room deepened as she listened to the voice on the other end. Her eyes widened, glistening with tears. "Are you sure?" she whispered, hoarsely. A pause. Then came the reply Margaret couldn't hear. Gloria's hand fell to her lap, the phone slipping down as tears streamed freely across her wrinkled cheeks. Margaret stepped forward, frightened. "Mom, what is it?" Gloria turned her head slowly, her gaze burning through Margaret's soul. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at the girl kneeling beside her bed. Then, with a trembling exhale that sounded like the first wind before a hurricane, Gloria swung her frail legs over the edge of the bed. Margaret gasped, her eyes widening in shock. "Ma'am, you're standing." Gloria's back straightened like a steel rod, her chin lifted in regal defiance. "Child," she rasped, her voice low but fierce. "I've been pretending long enough. I will not die in this bed while thieves feast on my legacy." Margaret's mouth fell open as Gloria reached for her silk scarf and tied it tightly around her silver hair, her movements steady despite her trembling muscles. "Help me dress," she ordered. Margaret scrambled to obey, fetching Gloria's gold-trimmed robe and delicate slippers. She dressed the old woman with careful, reverent hands, her own body shaking with adrenaline. Gloria's eyes glowed with iron determination as she smoothed the wrinkles in her robe. Today, the masquerade ends. Moments later, Gloria stood tall in her royal robe, gripping Margaret's thin shoulder for balance. "Come with me, child," she said. They moved slowly down the silent hallway, the early sun streaming through grand windows, bathing them in gold. Margaret felt tears burn her eyes as she walked beside the woman who just days ago had lain helpless and forgotten. In the grand foyer, the butler froze mid-step, his tray of tea rattling violently as he took in the sight of Gloria, standing unassisted, her posture regal and unbreakable. Servants whispered and scurried like startled mice as Gloria walked to the main door and flung it open. Outside, 3 black sedans pulled into the driveway in smooth formation. 4 men in sleek black suits stepped out, flanking a familiar figure, Sam, Gloria's loyal personal assistant, his eyes filling with tears as he bowed deeply. "Madam Peterson," he said, his voice cracking its good to see you on your feet again. Gloria's eyes flicked toward Margaret, filled with silent pride and quiet rage. "Bring everyone to the boardroom," she ordered Sam sharply. It's time they remembered who built this empire from dust. Margaret watched her with wonder, her small hand curled tightly around the photograph in her pocket. Deep in her chest, a faint flicker of hope burned brighter than it ever had before, whispering softly, "Your life is about to change forever." As the sun rose higher over the sprawling Peterson estate, Margaret walked half a step behind Gloria, her small feet nearly silent against the polished marble floors. Inside the grand boardroom, the director's advisors and senior staff sat stunned, their mouths agape, as Gloria entered with regal certainty, Margaret beside her like a shadow reborn. Gloria stood at the head of the table, her voice thundering with years of bottled power. "Today, we restore what greed tried to steal," she declared. Then, placing a gentle hand on Margaret's shoulder, she announced, "This is Margaret. She is not a maid. She is my granddaughter, the rightful heir of this empire." Gasps filled the room as Margaret lowered her eyes, tears shimmering on her lashes, her heart pounding with a hope so fierce it hurt. At that moment she understood that life can bury your worth under layers of cruelty, but the truth always finds its way back to the light. Sometimes the world will try to convince you that you are nothing, but remember, your worth isn't defined by what people call you. It's defined by what's written deep in your soul. If Margaret's journey inspired you today, let us know in the comments below. Share your thoughts and tell us, have you ever been underestimated? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video for more powerful stories that remind us dignity can never be stolen. It only waits to be reclaimed.